You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday the 22nd of January 2014. New M40 pub sends wrong signals. 21-year-old man detained at Stansted in terrorism probe. Al-Qaeda training British and European jihadists in Syria to set up terror cells at home. Jesus and Mo. EU to send military forces to Central African Republic. Sweden, Romania must pay for beggars. Italy, Bonino warns of sleeper cells among refugees. The world's 85 richest now worth as much as 3.5 billion poorest. Olympic terror threat mounts as police warn of terror suspect. Made in China, up to a quarter of California's smog. Thought for the day, food, obesity and genetic engineering. And finally, walking eagle. UK news. New M40 pub sends wrong signals. A pub chain has been accused of putting profits before sense after opening a new outlet at a motorway service station. The move sends motorists all the wrong signals, an alcohol charity has warned. Alcohol Concern said that the new JD Wetherspoon pub on the M40 was a backward step. The Hope and Champion will be open from 4 a.m. to 1 a.m. 7 days a week in the extra motorway service area at junction 2 of the M40 in Beaconsfield, Buckinghamshire. The company has spent more than £1.1 million on the pub, the first to be opened at a motorway service area, which will sell real ale from local and regional brewers as well as non-alcoholic and hot drinks. Eric Appleby, Chief Executive of Alcohol Concern, said, "Selling alcohol on our motorways sends all the wrong signals to drivers. It just sounds like profits being put before sense." Campaigners have worked tirelessly to improve road safety in the UK and persuade people that drinking and driving don't mix, and this feels like a backward step. Sir Ian Gilmore, Special Advisor on Alcohol at the Royal College of Physicians and Chair of the Alcohol Health Alliance, said motorway service stations are supposed to be havens for tired and stressed drivers. He said that people will succumb to temptation if they see alcohol in front of them. "I know people can drive off the motorway to find a pub, but they make an active choice to do that," he added. World at 8, wonderful, added to the expensive and awful food on motorways, they're adding booze. At what price of profit? 21-year-old man detained at Stansted in terrorism probe. A 21-year-old man was stopped at Stansted Airport on Sunday and has now been arrested and remains in custody, Scotland Yard has confirmed. He was arrested on suspicion of being involved in the commission, preparation and instigation of terrorism offences. The man was stopped at Stansted Airport at 8:40 p.m. on Sunday after returning to the UK from Istanbul in Turkey via Stuttgart in Germany. He was arrested by officers from the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Command and taken to a London police station where he remains in custody. The arrest was not in response to any immediate threat or risk, Scotland Yard said. Detectives have carried out searches of 3 addresses in connection with the investigation. Inquiries are ongoing and we are not able to give further details at present, he added. A Scotland Yard spokesman could not confirm whether the man arrested was suspected of travelling to Syria. Al-Qaeda training British and European jihadists in Syria to set up terror cells at home. British people fighting in Syria are being trained as jihadists and then encouraged to return to the UK to launch attacks on home soil, an Al-Qaeda defector and Western security sources have told the Telegraph. In a rare interview on Turkey's border with Syria, the defector from Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham said that recruits from Britain, Europe and the US were being indoctrinated in extremist anti-Western ideology, trained in how to make and detonate car bombs and suicide vests and sent home to start new terror cells. He has provided the first confirmation from Syrian rebels that young British men are being indoctrinated in extremist anti-Western ideology. Some of those intent on overthrowing the Syrian regime are being brainwashed by fanatics, the former member of the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham warned. His comments echo the concerns of security services at a time when it is feared that up to 500 Britons are fighting in Syria and could return to emulate attacks such as the London bombings and 9/11. World date, and we will probably keep paying benefits to their families as well. Jesus and Mo. The Muslim Association of Britain (MAB) publishes statement against potentially inflammatory nature of cartoons on Jesus and Mo website, which features cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad and Jesus, suggesting they are as insulting as Danish cartoons from 2005. The website at www.jesusandmo.net may be irreverent and many Christians and Muslims will find it offensive, but it is hilarious. I can't do it justice, but Muhammad shouts out, "Oh Christ Almighty," from the kitchen. Jesus from the drawing room, "Mo, do you have to swear like that? You know it makes me feel uncomfortable." Mo replies, "Sorry, I spilled a bowl of grated cheddar and Stilton all over the floor." Jesus, "Well, sweep it up and try not to use my name in vain, eh?" Mo, "OK." And then a little later, "Cheeses swept! Mo!" World at 8, frankly I love it, but someone, somewhere will have no sense of humour at all. European news. EU to send military forces to Central African Republic. European Union foreign ministers agreed on Monday to send up to 1,000 soldiers to the Central African Republic (CAR) to help restore stability to the country, in what is the EU's first major military operation in 6 years, diplomatic sources said. Ministers meeting in Brussels approved a proposal to send a battalion-sized force to CAR, but detailed military plans have yet to be finalised. However, it is hoped the force will start arriving in the war-torn country by the end of February, with the capital Bangui the main base of operations. It's not yet clear which EU countries will contribute troops. Estonia has promised soldiers and Lithuania, Slovenia, Finland, Belgium, Poland and Sweden are among countries considering sending troops, diplomats say. Large EU countries such as Britain, Germany and Italy have said they will not contribute. World at 8, no point really. Like the UN troops, they cannot really do anything, just observe and have a training ground. I don't think hearts and minds apply in this instant though. Sweden. Romania must pay for beggars. It's time for the bill to end up where it belongs. Two top Liberal Party, Folkpartiet politicians argued in the op-ed pages of the Dagens Nyheter newspaper on Tuesday. Stockholm is no longer composed of the inner city and the suburb, but the inner city, suburbs and slums, wrote Stockholm City Hall politician Lotta Edholm and MEP candidate Erik Scheller. The chill behind walls made of plastic bags, melted snow instead of running water and plastic buckets for the waste appears to be an intolerable life to all of us who've had a roof over our heads and warm water in the taps. Edholm and Scheller said, however, that the realisation that such shanty towns on the edges of Stockholm were preferable to life in the residents' home countries was the most shocking. As fellow human beings, we react even more strongly when we realise that these Swedish slums are something that people in Europe flee to, not from, the politicians wrote. In their op-ed, the Liberal politicians said that 9 out of 10 persons who ask for money on the streets of Sweden are Romanian Roma who have headed north to escape poverty and discrimination in their home country. Edholm and Scheller argued that Romania was not doing enough to help the poorest amongst its citizens. World at 8. Why should it, or any other country, when they can push their poor and illiterate into other countries to pay for? Italy. Bonino warns of sleeper cells amongst refugees. Italy's Foreign Minister Emma Bonino on Tuesday warned of the possible presence of terrorist sleeper cells among refugees arriving in Europe and said the issue of security must be central to the immigration debate. Millions of refugees, including women and children, provide an easy hiding place for a whole series of other gentlemen, said Bonino. It is a European problem because Italy is a transit country and the final destination of sleeper cells is a matter for the whole of Europe, she continued. The Foreign Minister added that millions of refugees are on the move in the Mediterranean, 1 million in Lebanon, 500,000 in Jordan, 300,000 in Turkey. It's no longer a question of how many refugees each country takes, she said, adding that the migrant boat landings on the Sicilian island of Lampedusa and deaths at sea are only the tip of the iceberg. World news. The world's 85 richest now worth as much as 3.5 billion poorest. The poorest half of the world's population, that's 3.5 billion people, control as much wealth as the richest 85 individuals. On the eve of World Economic Forum, when the global elite gather in Davos, Switzerland, to forecast international trends, Oxfam has released a new report. Working for the few. documenting yawning global wealth disparities. Other findings. The world's richest 1% control nearly 50% of global wealth. In 24 out of 26 countries studied, the richest 1% has increased their share of national wealth since 1980. Only 3 in 10 people live in countries where economic equality has not increased over the past 3 decades. In the US, 95% of post-financial crash wealth generated, for example, since 2009, went into the bank accounts of the richest 1%. 9 in 10 people in the United States control less wealth in real terms than they did before the financial crash. Olympic terror threat mounts as police warn of terror suspect. With some 40,000 cops deployed inside the 1,500-mile so-called Ring of Steel, Putin has so far brushed aside offers from other nations to assist in ensuring the safety of athletes and spectators at the Games in the Black Sea resort town of Sochi. But with those nations, including the US, sending their own people to the Games, they have nearly as big a stake in safety as Putin. The Pentagon confirmed late Monday that the US military will have 2 ships and other assets at the ready. The Pentagon maintains that no aircraft are being sent to the region, contrary to an earlier report. In further developments, police in Sochi have handed out flyers at area hotels warning of a woman they believe could be a terrorist and who may currently be in the city. One flyer, obtained by CNN, asked workers to be on the lookout for Ruzana Salima Ibragimova, described as the widow of a member of a militant group from the Caucasus region. The woman, according to the flyer, may be involved in organising a terrorist act within the 2014 Olympic region. Some describe her as a Black Widow, a notorious type of terrorist that's emerged in Russia's clashes with the Chechen separatists. Many of them are wives of insurgents killed by government forces, and they've been blamed for high-profile suicide bombings. Made in China up to a quarter of California smog. What goes around comes around, quite literally in the case of smog. The US has outsourced many of its production lines to China and, in return, global winds are exporting the Chinese factories' pollution right back to the US. Decades ago, the US began outsourcing its industrial production, resulting in the ubiquitous Made in China label. US factories shut down and Chinese ones opened up in droves. It looked like a clever scheme to shift noxious pollution to the opposite side of the planet, but it is backfiring. Jin Tai-lin of Peking University in Beijing, China, and his colleagues used economic and emission data to divide Chinese emissions into several categories. They measured emissions produced in China for products consumed in China and emissions produced in China for products destined for the US. An added twist came when the team combined their emissions data with atmospheric models that predict how winds shuttle particles around. These winds push Chinese smog over the Pacific and dump it on the western US, from Seattle to Southern California. The modelling revealed that on any given day in 2006, goods made in China for the US market accounted for up to a quarter of the sulphate smog over the western United States. Thought for the day: food, obesity and genetic engineering. So we have more problems in the UK now than immigration, being outbred, outthought and outfinanced. We are now being outsourced as a nation of truly obese fatties. Put this with the growing elderly who should all be euthanised, if not already sick after around 60 years of age, to save the finances of the ever-growing Islamic youth who will not want to pay for a passel of old unbelievers, and we have heaven on earth in the UK and Europe. Now, I'm fairly large, used not to be, but I am now, and I know the reason. Too much wrong food, too much wine and too little exercise, dashing up to sodding Blackpool notwithstanding. Even as a very slim youngster, teenager, mother and even grandmother, I hated walking or in fact any form of sport, except perhaps canoeing, which has always appealed to me, but suffice to say I still hate rain, getting wet, getting out of breath, and really should have been born in the days of Rome when some poor slaves carried me around in a litter. But as a young mother without a car, pushchair, car seat, carrying device of some sort or another, walking with a very large pram and one infant and one toddler was exercise enough, as we never lived in large towns, so problem solved. I had to walk my babies to preschool, shopping, anything during the weekdays. And when they were larger they walked to school, as indeed after a hefty bus ride I had to. In the days of old, not everyone had a car or two, and most people in the wonderfully underpopulated and underbuilt over country lived within walking distance of civilization. We had buses and trains for places we couldn't walk to. I didn't have the problems of the young mothers today of living on vast estates many miles from the nearest towns, which are usually bereft of shops now anyway, and also miles away from the huge superstores which have sprung up like mushrooms well away from the thousands of new build ghettos that were built at the same time. Laughingly enough, many of these newish estates have a local pub but no libraries or small shops near them. And we are still building these small cities in vast numbers to cover our land with what are in fact virtual hovels to the New World Order for the United Kingdom. Now, I have admitted my faults and my Michelin-style appearance, but are we all so honest? Our governments and food agencies and food control whatevers have been less than honest with us, and another truth is, if they had been, would we have taken any notice at all? I doubt it. After rationing in the 1940s, most kids went wild. I wasn't allowed to go wild, but the convent tuck shop was the most popular thing at school at 11 o'clock in the morning for 1 hour. But on walking home through Sunning Hill with my pal Maureen Halfpenny, we stopped at the small local newsagents and bought a packet of Smith's crisps with the salt bag or a chocolate iced lolly. Heaven. And I never told Mummy either. But nowadays, kids for the last 3 generations have been ruined by cleverly placed sweets in the new supermarkets, advertising on TV and in comics, parents who have less sense or money or need to keep the brats quiet in front of a TV with a packet of cheap gumph, and the strange fairly new thing of house key kids and split families or lack of actual support around these newish built estates. Now, I'm not going into full social information here, but our whole method of bringing up children and educating them has gone away. We are now a virtual society with virtual families and virtual children, and if they don't exist in virtual land with virtual food, they don't exist at all. Many of our children take their so-called standards from celebs or strangers. They don't know and never will, as the multicultural input which has and does herald disaster for us all. And our establishment are almost 85% to blame from limiting our information and making us reliant on what we should not be reliant on. We can get food at any time of the year, in or out of season, from anywhere in the world, and anyone with even a small amount of money can do so, and I mean anyone and everyone. After the rationing and shortcomings of the last war, in which the middle, lower and working classes suffered the most privations, a peculiar sort of communistic attitude developed, and those people openly said it was their turn now. And I have that quote on memory as said to my mother. And this attitude and mentality is still surviving today and has had its backlash. Now every Tom, Dick and Ally can get strawberries and venison out of season, salads all year, exotic fruit and vegetables flown in from Africa or Spain, and in fact there is nothing anyone cannot get at any time of the year now, and all for the price of a few pence. Alcohol as well, and cheap wine floods the market every day of every year. Many people will say, well, the people with money used to eat like this, so why can't we? Well, there is an untruism in that one, and a good deal of misinformation. Now, I didn't starve during the war, as I was a black market baby and proud of it. Money mattered then, if not now, but things were short for people like my parents as well. But in the days since, certainly up to the last 30 years, the so-called privileged classes, and by that I mean old inherited money or wealthy business people, didn't eat the way the pigs that pass for people do now. The bins of the wealthy in those days didn't have the rubbish that the bins from the local council estates used to have. Wealthy people eat what they shot or brought from local sources, and this means in season for fruit and vegetables, certain fowl and game. People in those days were frugal, and I never remember sausages, mince, sweets, biscuits or snacks in the house, and certainly nothing frozen, as the only thing frozen when I was younger were peas, and we didn't have a freezer, not being country folk with sides of lamb. Oranges were a treat, as were bananas after the war, and I don't remember ever having melons when young. So in short, the so-called poor can now eat with more variety than the rich did 50 years ago. But are they making the most of it? No. Even now, in a recession, which I kid you not has not gone away, I pass people with trolleys full of absolute crap in the supermarket we have, both immigrant and ours. Full of cereals, fast food, TV dinners, sweets, ice creams, cakes, biscuits, soft drinks, you name it, and it is Sugar City. And many of the exotic fruits, fish and vegetables, etc. are simply going to waste and being thrown away. We've turned vast areas of other countries into Farmageddons, and worse for our people, although they're eating worse than they did during the war, although they wouldn't admit it. Europe is becoming a Farmageddon into which thousands of animals are kept in terrible conditions, cruelly slaughtered and sent piecemeal over here to be packed. Thailand, with its crustaceans reared and harvested by nasty means, are but a small example. In Poland, pigs are treated with extreme cruelty and their meat put into our sausages and pies. The Dutch have just stopped docking pigs' tails, but if I went on about the ghastly halal slaughterhouses and European and UK factory farms, I would be here all day, so I won't. You can guess what they are like, and all in vain do these animals suffer and die, because most of our UK fatties are fat because of the man-made disasters that are soups, cereals, sweets, ready meals, biscuits, cakes and the rest. All made by man, for man, with obesity in mind. We even put sugar in salad dressings, for God's sake. Because we have to feed so many mouths over here nowadays, it isn't our poor that devour food at the rate of knots. Think of our thousands of immigrant restaurants and takeaways and franchises and you will understand why our governments in their genetic social engineering stance have made food and the longevity of food in the modern supermarkets overtake any thought of national health. It is to feed the masses, and whether ethnic or not, the strongest will win. The powers that be suddenly realise that sugar is the root of all obesity, do they? Then why have they been pushing it into us for years and years, hidden in virtually everything that has been prolifically advertised since the last war? The establishment have jumped onto the tobacco bandwagon in a big way, but just succeeded in closing down thousands of pubs and clubs, well, British ones that is. And what is that barricade fronting the supermarkets now, so you cannot even see tobacco products? And they've started that with alcohol as well. Now smoking and too much drink are bad for you, and we all know it now. But if someone wants to smoke, drink or drug themselves to death, they will find a way, and indeed, now looking at the papers, a cupful of sugar will do the trick just as well. But consider the source. Our government, advertisers, shopkeepers have all relished the fact that smoking was good for you until 30 years ago. Drinking was as well. Then they started on stopping pregnant women having a drink. Rubbish. A small glass of Guinness was the one thing that kept me from throwing up with all my children, and with my last one, when the UK discovered wine, a glass of red occasionally didn't hurt either. The whole point is that since every sort of food is available, there is a price, and it is not just the price the animals, the African farmers or the European slaughterhouses pay. It is the human price to us and our bodies and our minds. We have been brought up in this country to want cheap food. It doesn't matter whether it is good food, as long as it's cheap and plentiful. And put that with the smoking and drinking culture that has been encouraged over the last 40 years, and you have bodily Armageddon. Many years ago, Dr. Atkins did a diet, mainly protein and almost no carbohydrates, whether complex or not. It worked, but it involved buying good food sparingly, not a plethora of cheap and readily available crap. But the establishment pooh-poohed it and have lived to realise their mistake. It is sugar that makes us fatter as far as foods are concerned, not necessarily the calorie content. For years we've been told fruit yoghurt, cereals, breakfast bars, jacket potatoes, rice noodles, spaghetti, low-fat meals and any form of takeaways are good for us. Whether they all contain massive amounts of sugar or a form of carbohydrate that turns to sugar in the body. In fact, takeaways, Chinese or Indian food, pizzas, McDonald's, Burger King, Southern Fried Chicken and all of the new food emporiums which have been encouraged by our local councils are sugar houses to which we have all been encouraged to worship, as well as our local temples, the supermarkets, who have to make a profit. And that is the end line, profit. Unlike days of old when farmers made money from selling their own produce, small shops made money from customers buying their produce, and most if not all relied on seasonal local fruit and vegetables, fishermen sold direct to restaurants locally or sent their fish up to London, and we didn't have the millions of extra people we now have in the UK, our entire way of eating and life has been altered to suit the way that the UK was engineered to go after the last war. Profit made from the vast amount of people allowed into the country, the poor already here, the denigration of our own farmers and fishermen, and the method of putting a preservative into practically everything so it remains on the shelf longer, has all contributed to the obesity of our people. If you look very carefully, the rich even now, and I do not mean the footballers, celebs or actors, whatever, I mean the established wealthy, are not usually obese. Why? They move around more, they eat well but not often and drink likewise. It is because they've done that for generations and our poor haven't. They have had to take it while they can, and it shows. As far as our immigrant population go, they're busy making money out of us from supplying foods and come from countries that had starving people in as a matter of course, and they don't come here not to eat. So it's not directly the fault of the great British public. You cannot avoid the fact that we are and have been subjected to a massive amount of subliminal messages about food. And there has sprung up around us a huge industry of supplying and importing vast amounts of food from foreign countries that we've come to rely on, ignorant of the methods and means of getting it, and also ignorant of the processes it has undergone to become appealing to us on the shelves. One question I would ask: why the hell do they shrink wrap cucumbers? And why the hell do they put sugar in virtually everything that they encourage us to buy all the time? It doesn't need a preservative in it if it moves off the shelf quickly, does it? Someone, somewhere is nice and slim and living very well, thank you, due to us wanting, buying and eating what is in essence crap. And finally, Walking Eagle. On a recent trip to the United States, Tony Blair, ex-Prime Minister of the UK and now UN Middle East Peace Envoy, addressed a major gathering of Native American Indians. He spoke for almost 2 hours on his success in bringing about a lasting peace settlement amongst the warring nations of the Middle East, likening it to the way that the US government found a suitable agreement with the North American tribes. At the conclusion of his speech, the crowd presented him with a plaque inscribed with his new Indian name, Walking Eagle. A very chuffed Tony then departed in his motorcade, waving to the crowds. A news reporter later asked one of the Indians how they came to select the new name given to Tony Blair. They explained that Walking Eagle is the name given to a bird so full of shit that it can no longer fly. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night.